On the night of their sacred wedding, the Apache King quietly said, "I want you beside me 5 times before dawn." His exhausted bride whispered, "I can't go on." But what happened next had nothing to do with desire, and everything to do with an ancient Apache tradition that would either unite them forever or destroy their marriage before sunrise. The last rays of the desert sun painted the towering red cliffs with streaks of gold and crimson. A warm evening breeze carried the scent of cedar smoke and sage across the Apache camp, where hundreds of warriors, elders, women, and children gathered around enormous ceremonial fires. Tonight was unlike any other. The mighty Apache King, known throughout the Southwest for his courage, wisdom, and unmatched leadership, was taking a bride. His name alone inspired both respect and fear among neighboring tribes. Stories described him as a giant among men, a fearless hunter who had defended his people through droughts, raids, and bitter winters. Yet those who truly knew him spoke of something different. They said the king never drew his weapon unless peace had failed. They said every decision he made was for the survival of his people. The woman standing beside him knew almost none of these stories. She had traveled for days with her relatives to reach the Apache lands. Every mile had filled her heart with greater uncertainty. Whispers had followed her long before she arrived. They say the Apache King never shows mercy. They say his traditions are impossible. They say no outsider truly understands his people. By the time she reached the village, fear had become heavier than the small bundle she carried. Now she stood beneath the open sky, wearing a beautifully embroidered buckskin dress decorated with tiny turquoise beads that shimmered in the firelight. Eagle feathers gently moved in her dark braided hair. She looked beautiful. She did not feel brave. The rhythmic beat of ceremonial drums echoed through the valley. An elder stepped forward. Holding an eagle feather toward the heavens, he offered a blessing in the Apache language. Though the bride understood only a few words, she recognized the names of the Creator, the mountains, the rivers, and the ancestors. The ceremony was about far more than 2 people. It was about joining 2 paths into one. The king stood silently throughout the blessing. His broad shoulders remained still. His expression was calm. He neither smiled nor frowned. To the bride, his silence only deepened the mystery surrounding him. When the ceremony ended, cheers erupted throughout the camp. Children laughed. Women danced around the fire. Warriors raised their voices toward the stars. For the first time that evening, the king turned toward his bride. His eyes were steady, not cold, not harsh, simply thoughtful. "You are welcome among my people," he said quietly. His voice surprised her. It carried no anger. No command. Only certainty. She lowered her eyes respectfully. "Thank you," she whispered. The celebration continued long into the evening. Large clay pots simmered over open fires. Freshly roasted venison filled the air with its rich aroma. Corn cakes, berries, squash, and wild honey were shared among every family without exception. The king personally served food to several elderly members of the tribe before taking any for himself. The bride noticed. It did not match the frightening stories she had heard. Still, she remained cautious. After the feast, the oldest woman in the village approached her. Age had bent the woman's back, but not her spirit. Her silver hair reflected the firelight as she smiled warmly. "You fear what comes next," the elder woman said. The bride hesitated before answering. "I do." The old woman nodded gently. Fear grows best where knowledge is absent. Before the bride could ask what she meant, the drums suddenly fell silent. Every conversation stopped. Even the children became quiet. The Apache King slowly stood. He looked toward the stars before speaking. "Tonight," he announced, "our journey begins." The tribe answered with respectful silence. Then he turned toward his new wife. "There are 5 sacred promises every king and queen must complete before the first sunrise of their marriage. Her heartbeat quickened. 5 promises? She had never heard anyone mention such a tradition. The king continued. These promises cannot be completed alone. The bride searched his face for some clue. Instead, she found only calm determination. Around them, no one seemed surprised. The elders nodded knowingly. The warriors lowered their heads respectfully. Clearly, everyone understood except her. Anxiety tightened in her chest. Were the rumors true after all? Would these traditions be impossible? The king noticed the uncertainty in her eyes. Without another word, he gestured toward a quiet trail leading away from the celebration. She followed. The sounds of music gradually faded behind them until only the wind remained. They stopped beside an ancient cedar tree overlooking the valley. Moonlight bathed the landscape in silver. The king finally spoke. When I was a child, my father brought me here. She listened carefully. He told me a ruler's strength is measured by the people who trust him, not by the battles he wins. The bride remained silent. The king's words were unlike anything she expected. He knelt beside the cedar tree and brushed away loose sand. Hidden beneath the soil lay 5 smooth stones arranged in a circle. Each stone bore a different carved symbol. The king touched the first one. Trust. The second. Courage. The third. Sacrifice. The fourth. Loyalty. Finally, he rested his hand upon the largest stone. Family. The bride stared quietly. So, these are the 5 promises? He nodded. Our ancestors believed no marriage could survive without them. She felt both relieved and embarrassed. For hours she had imagined something entirely different. The king noticed the change in her expression. You believed the stories. She looked away. I did. He smiled faintly. Stories often grow larger than truth. Before she could respond, distant voices echoed through the darkness. The king immediately stood. His posture changed in an instant. Every relaxed movement disappeared. He became alert. Listening. Watching. The bride sensed danger before she saw it. A young warrior emerged from the shadows, breathing heavily. He stopped several steps away. My king, he said urgently, there is trouble. The king's expression hardened. What happened? The warrior glanced uneasily toward the bride before answering. Someone has disturbed the sacred boundary stones. Silence followed. The king's eyes narrowed. No animal could have done that. The messenger shook his head. No. The bride watched both men carefully. She did not understand the full meaning of the report, but she knew one thing. Someone had deliberately challenged the authority of the king on the very night of his wedding. The king turned toward his bride. Our first promise begins sooner than expected. She looked into his eyes. There was no fear there. Only resolve. He extended his hand. For these promises to succeed, he said, we walk together. After a brief hesitation, she placed her hand in his. For the first time since arriving in the Apache camp, she felt something stronger than fear. Hope. Together they walked into the moonlit darkness, unaware that hidden among the rocks above them, a pair of watchful eyes followed every step. Someone in the tribe did not want this marriage to survive until sunrise. And before the first sacred promise could be fulfilled, the newlywed king and queen would face a danger neither of them expected. The moon hung high above the Apache homeland, bathing the desert in silver light. The distant sounds of celebration had faded, replaced by the whisper of the wind through ancient cedar trees. The newly married king and queen followed the young warrior toward the sacred boundary stones, their footsteps silent across the cool sand. Neither of them spoke. The king's face remained calm, but every instinct told him something was wrong. No one dared disturb the boundary stones without sending a message. Those stones marked more than the tribe's territory, they symbolized the ancestors' protection over the Apache people. After nearly half an hour, they reached a narrow canyon where towering rock walls rose on both sides. Several warriors stood waiting with burning torches. As the king approached, they lowered their heads. "My king," one of them said quietly, "the northern marker has been moved." The king knelt beside the largest stone. Fresh footprints surrounded it, and the earth had been disturbed only a short time earlier. "This wasn't done by strangers," he said. The warriors exchanged uneasy glances. "You believe it was someone from our own tribe?" one asked. The king nodded slowly. "Only our people know where these markers are hidden." The bride watched in silence. She had expected her first night as queen to be filled with celebration, yet instead she found herself standing in the middle of a mystery that threatened the tribe itself. The king stood and turned toward her. "Our first sacred promise is trust." She nodded. "I remember. Trust is not believing everything you hear. Trust is choosing truth after seeking it." He handed her a small lantern. "Tonight, you will help me discover the truth." Surprised, she accepted it. "You trust me already?" The king looked directly into her eyes. "If I cannot trust my queen on the first night of our marriage, how can my people trust either of us tomorrow?" His words settled deeply in her heart. Together they began examining the ground. The bride noticed something the warriors had overlooked. A thin strip of blue cloth was caught beneath one of the stones. She carefully pulled it free. "This wasn't here naturally," she said. The king studied it. "It belongs to someone wearing ceremonial clothing." One elder frowned. "Only a handful of people wore blue during today's ceremony." Instead of accusing anyone, the king shook his head. "We seek evidence, not blame." The bride admired his patience. The rumors describing him as a ruthless ruler seemed farther from the truth with every passing hour. As dawn remained hours away, the search continued through the canyon. Suddenly, one of the younger warriors called out, "Tracks!" Everyone hurried toward him. A clear trail of footprints led away from the sacred stones and into the rocky hills. The king motioned for only 4 warriors to follow. "The rest stay here and protect the site." The small group moved carefully through narrow passages until they reached an abandoned lookout used many seasons ago. Inside lay broken pottery, ashes from a recent fire, and a leather pouch. The bride picked it up. Inside were several carved stones identical to those used in the boundary markers. Someone had planned this. The king's expression grew serious. This was never simple vandalism. "What does it mean?" the bride asked. He answered quietly. "Someone wishes to convince our people that the ancestors have abandoned us." The elder warrior's face turned pale. "If fear spreads, our enemies won't need to attack," the king finished. "The tribe will divide itself." The realization chilled everyone. As they prepared to leave, the bride noticed fresh scratches on the canyon wall. She held up her lantern. "They form a symbol." The king recognized it immediately. "The mark of the black coyote." The warriors murmured nervously. Years earlier, a proud Apache warrior known as Black Coyote had challenged the king's father for leadership. After refusing the judgment of the tribal council, he disappeared into the mountains with a handful of followers. Most believed he had died. Perhaps they had been wrong. The king remained composed. "If Black Coyote has returned, he wants more than revenge." "What does he want?" the bride asked. "The throne." Silence settled over the canyon. For the first time, the bride understood the true weight of becoming queen. She had not merely married a respected leader. She had become part of a struggle for the future of an entire nation. As they returned to camp, the eastern sky began showing the faintest hint of gray. The first sacred promise had been fulfilled. The king had trusted his new queen. She had trusted him. Together they had uncovered the first clue in a conspiracy hidden within the tribe. But 4 sacred promises still remained. And somewhere beyond the rising sun, Black Coyote was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The first rays of dawn stretched across the Apache homeland, painting the red cliffs with bands of gold and amber. The camp slowly awakened, unaware that during the night their king and new queen had uncovered evidence of a hidden conspiracy. Smoke rose from cooking fires as children chased one another between the teepees, but beneath the ordinary rhythm of the morning, a quiet uneasiness lingered. Only the tribal elders knew what had happened at the northern boundary. The king intended to keep it that way. Panic is more dangerous than any enemy, he told the council. Until we know who stands behind this, the people must remain united. The elders nodded in agreement. One of them, White Eagle, studied the young queen with thoughtful eyes. "You found the first clue," he said. "That speaks well of your spirit." She lowered her head respectfully. "I simply noticed what others missed." "That," the elder replied with a faint smile, "is exactly what a leader must do." Before another word could be spoken, the oldest woman of the tribe entered the council lodge carrying a long bundle wrapped in soft buckskin. The room immediately fell silent. The king rose to greet her. "Grandmother Aponi." She nodded and carefully placed the bundle before the queen. "Your second sacred promise begins today." The queen slowly unfolded the wrapping. Inside rested a beautifully crafted bow made from mountain ash, decorated with turquoise and eagle feathers. Alongside it lay a quiver filled with handcrafted arrows. "I have never used a bow like this," the queen admitted. "You are not expected to master it today," Aponi said gently. "The promise is not about perfect aim." The king smiled. "It is about courage." The queen looked confused. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," the king explained. "It is choosing to move forward even while fear walks beside you." The elder woman pointed toward the distant cliffs. "Before sunset, you must climb Eagle Ridge and retrieve the white feather placed there by our ancestors." The queen followed her gaze. The ridge stood high above the valley, surrounded by steep rocks and narrow trails. The climb itself looked dangerous. She swallowed nervously. "And I must do this alone?" The king shook his head. "No." She looked relieved. "We climb together." A short time later, the king, the queen, and 4 trusted warriors began their journey toward Eagle Ridge. The trail wound through towering rock formations and ancient juniper trees. Birds circled overhead. The desert seemed peaceful. Too peaceful. The king noticed broken branches beside the trail. Someone had passed recently. He quietly signaled the warriors to remain alert. The queen noticed his expression. "Do you think we're being followed?" "I know we are." She instinctively reached for the bow hanging across her shoulder. The king spoke calmly. "Do not let unseen eyes control your heart." She nodded, forcing herself to remain steady. Hours passed before they reached the base of Eagle Ridge. The final climb was far steeper than it appeared from below. Loose stones shifted beneath every step. Several times the queen nearly slipped. Each time, the king offered a hand, not to carry her, but to steady her so she could continue climbing herself. Halfway up the mountain they heard a sharp whistle. One of the warriors instantly ducked. An arrow struck a nearby tree. Everyone froze. Another arrow followed. This one landed only inches from the king's shoulder. "Ambush!" shouted one warrior. The attackers remained hidden among the rocks. The king quickly guided the queen behind a massive boulder. "Stay low." She took a deep breath, her heart pounding. The stories she had heard as a child suddenly returned. She had imagined this moment many times, but never as queen of the Apache. The king looked toward the ridge. "They're trying to stop us from reaching the summit." "Who are they?" "They wear no tribal colors." Another volley of arrows rained down. The warriors returned fire, forcing the attackers to retreat farther into the cliffs. The king studied the terrain. There are only 3 of them. How can you tell? They're trying to sound like many. The queen listened carefully. He was right. The echoes between the canyon walls had made a handful of attackers sound like an entire war party. The king smiled slightly. Fear often makes small dangers appear much larger. He pointed toward a narrow ledge. Follow me. Moving carefully between rocks, they climbed beyond the attackers' line of sight. The hidden warriors searched the lower trail, believing the king remained trapped. Minutes later, the Apache party appeared above them. The attackers looked up in shock. Drop your weapons, the king commanded. Instead, the 3 masked men fled into the mountains. One stumbled, leaving behind a leather satchel. Inside the satchel were dried food, spare arrows, and a silver pendant engraved with the image of a black coyote. The king's expression darkened. The same mark. The queen held the pendant carefully. So Black Coyote truly has followers. He does. And they know about the sacred promises. The king nodded. They're trying to prevent us from completing them. By late afternoon they finally reached the summit of Eagle Ridge. The wind blew strongly across the cliffs. Near the edge stood a weathered cedar pole wrapped with faded prayer ribbons left by generations of Apache families. At its top rested a single white eagle feather. The queen stepped forward slowly. She looked across the endless desert stretching beyond the horizon. For the first time since arriving, she no longer felt like a frightened outsider. She felt responsible for the people living below. With steady hands she removed the feather. The king approached. What did you feel? She smiled softly. I was afraid every step of the climb. And yet? I climbed anyway. The king nodded proudly. Then you understand courage. The warriors bowed respectfully. The second sacred promise had been fulfilled. But as the group prepared to descend, one of the king's scouts came racing up the trail, breathless. My king! What is it? The southern watchtower. The scout struggled to catch his breath. It has been burned. Silence fell over the mountain. The king's eyes turned toward the distant valley where a thin column of black smoke now rose into the evening sky. Black Coyote was no longer testing them from the shadows. He had begun his attack. The king tightened his grip on his bow. We return home. The queen looked once more at the feather in her hands. The sacred promises were becoming more than ancient traditions. They were preparing both of them for the battle that was rapidly approaching. And somewhere beyond the smoke, an enemy waited for the perfect chance to tear the Apache nation apart. Dark smoke drifted across the evening sky as the king, the queen, and their warriors rode hard toward the Apache village. The horses thundered over the rocky trail, their hooves scattering dust across the desert floor. Every rider understood the meaning of the smoke rising from the southern watchtower. Someone had declared war. The queen clutched the white eagle feather inside her medicine pouch. Only hours earlier she had completed the second sacred promise, courage. Now the land itself seemed to demand the third. As they reached the valley, frightened families were already gathering in the center of the village. Mothers held their children close while elders tried to calm the growing panic. The southern watchtower still smoldered. Fortunately, the fire had been contained before it spread to nearby homes. The king dismounted immediately. Report. A seasoned warrior stepped forward. My king, the tower keeper survived. The attackers struck at sunset, set the tower ablaze, then disappeared into the hills. Were they seen? They wore masks. The black coyote symbol? The warrior nodded. They left it burned into the tower's wooden gate. The queen exchanged a worried glance with the king. Black Coyote was becoming bolder. He no longer hid his presence. He wanted the tribe to fear him. That night the tribal council gathered once again. The elders sat in a circle around a small ceremonial fire. The king placed the recovered silver pendant beside the burned piece of wood taken from the watchtower. The same enemy. White Eagle spoke first. He attacks symbols, not people. Grandmother Aponi nodded slowly. He wants the tribe to believe the spirits no longer protect us. Another elder looked toward the queen. The third sacred promise cannot wait. The queen listened carefully. What must I do? Grandmother Aponi smiled gently. Sacrifice. The word echoed through the lodge. The queen had expected another difficult journey or dangerous test. Instead, the old woman handed her a beautifully woven blanket embroidered with blue, red, and white patterns. This belonged to the king's mother. The queen carefully touched the cloth. It is beautiful. It is also precious, Aponi replied. The third promise asks you to give away something valuable, willingly, without expecting anything in return. The queen looked surprised. To whom? You will know when the moment comes. The next morning the village was busy repairing the damaged watchtower. The king worked beside ordinary warriors, lifting heavy logs and carrying fresh timber. The queen noticed how no task seemed beneath him. Children smiled as he greeted them. Elders offered blessings as he passed. The frightening ruler described in old stories seemed impossible to find. As the repairs continued, a young boy suddenly came running through the village. My sister. He was crying. My sister is missing. Everything stopped. The king knelt beside him. What happened? We were gathering water near the eastern cliffs. She wandered after a mountain goat. How old is she? 7. The king stood immediately. Gather the search parties. Within minutes dozens of warriors prepared to leave. The queen stepped forward. I'll go too. One elder hesitated. The cliffs are dangerous. The king looked at his wife. The choice is yours. She nodded firmly. If I am to become queen, I cannot remain behind while one of our children is lost. The king smiled proudly. Then we searched together. The eastern cliffs were filled with narrow ravines, hidden caves, and steep drop-offs. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Several search parties found footprints, but each trail disappeared among the rocks. The queen refused to give up. Finally, she heard something. A faint cry. This way. She climbed over a large boulder and discovered the little girl trapped on a narrow ledge halfway down a rocky slope. The child had twisted her ankle. She could neither climb up nor safely climb down. The queen carefully approached. Don't move. I'm scared, the little girl whispered. I know. The queen looked around. The ledge was too unstable for both of them. One wrong step could send loose rocks tumbling into the canyon. The king reached the edge above. I'll lower a rope. The queen shook her head. The rocks won't support both of us. She studied the cliff. There was only one safe option. She removed her own leather climbing belt and tied it securely around the frightened child. What are you doing? The girl asked. Getting you home. But what about you? The queen smiled. I'll find another way. Using the king's rope and her own belt together, the warriors slowly lifted the child to safety. As they pulled her upward, part of the ledge suddenly collapsed beneath the queen. The king lunged forward, grabbing her wrist just before she slipped into the canyon. Several warriors rushed to help. Together they pulled her to safety. For several moments no one spoke. The king looked directly into her eyes. You risked your own life. She glanced toward the rescued girl now safely in her mother's arms. She has her whole life ahead of her. The king quietly nodded. That is sacrifice. When they returned to the village, the rescued child's family approached the queen. The little girl's mother was wrapped in worn clothing patched many times over. Their family had lost nearly everything during the previous winter. Without hesitation, the queen remembered Grandmother Aponi's words. She unfolded the beautiful blanket that had belonged to the king's mother. The villagers watched in silence. She gently placed it around the little girl. The child's mother gasped. "My queen, this is too valuable." The queen smiled. "It will keep your daughter warm." Tears filled the woman's eyes. "I cannot repay such kindness." "You don't have to." Grandmother Aponi watched from a distance. A proud smile crossed her face. The third sacred promise had been completed, not through wealth or power, but through compassion. That evening the entire tribe gathered around the central fire. For the first time since the attacks began, hope returned to the village. Children laughed again. Songs filled the air. The king stood beside the queen before the assembled people. "Our ancestors teach us that true leaders protect others before themselves." He turned toward his wife. "Today your queen reminded us what sacrifice truly means." The people raised their hands in respect. The queen felt warmth spread through her heart. For the first time, she no longer felt like an outsider. She belonged. But the celebration did not last long. A lone rider suddenly appeared at the edge of the village. His horse was exhausted. He barely remained in the saddle. The rider collapsed before the king. "My king." He struggled to breathe. "The Western scouts. What about them?" "They've disappeared." He handed the king a torn piece of leather marked with the now familiar black coyote symbol. On its reverse side, a message had been carved into the hide with a knife. "Complete your sacred promises if you can. Before the fifth sunrise, your throne will belong to me." The village fell silent. The king slowly folded the message. Black Coyote was no longer sending warnings. He was issuing a challenge. Only two sacred promises remained, loyalty and family. And the final battle for the Apache nation was drawing closer with every passing hour.